I bought my first rental property at 20 years old with only $5,000 out of pocket. So in today's video, I'm going to go over what I was looking for that deal and how I got into it. This was over 3 years ago when I first jumped into this. So I'm going to take you back to what my mindset was like and how basically at 20 years old, I was able to live for free. So don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button for weekly videos on real estate related topics, New Hampshire real estate market, all that good stuff. And if you're looking to buy a house or have questions about starting in investing, feel free to hit me up. I got my contact info here or down below in the description. Feel free anytime. So let's get into it. So what do I look for in a rental property? So being such a young investor, the biggest thing I've been looking at while investing in properties is cash flow, because I don't necessarily have the money that I need to store in a rental property. So I'm buying these more to produce income than to hold cash and grow over time. But also with me being so young, with time, I am just going to build equity into the property, which will also add to how much the property is worth. And basically, what equity is just the monetary value that you have in the property after your loans and debts are paid off. So, say you have a $200,000 house, you have a $175,000 mortgage. Technically, you have $25,000 of equity in your house. Now, this isn't something that you can just go and pull out cash like a bank account. You don't really have access to these funds unless you were to do a HELOC, which is a home equity line of credit. And that you can get access to, but that is also taking a loan out. So technically, you're kind of taking a loan against the equity you have, and you do get charged interest. But mainly, what equity is you capture it once you sell, and that's where you make your profit off of the property. Like I said, this was about 3 years ago, and when I was looking back then, my biggest thing I wanted to do was at least $200 cash flow per door. So if I was looking at a 2 unit, once I moved out of the property, because I was using this as a house hack, which means I live in one unit and rent out the other to basically offset my mortgage costs and essentially have me living for free to very low money. And more of a physical thing I was looking for in a property was at least 2 bedroom units. And now this is more of a personal preference and kind of a location preference. I seem that 2 bedrooms around my area are more in demand than a 1 bedroom or a 3 bedroom, because 1 bedrooms you just can't get as much rent for necessarily. And then 3 bedrooms are kind of hard because if it's just like a couple, they don't really need 3 bedrooms. So you really have to find that specific person looking for that big of a unit. And of course, when you're looking at these places, you want to make sure that they're in good condition, they're stayed updated, and everything's actually good, which is where you have a house inspection done so that the house inspector can tell you the things that he saw that should be a red flag that maybe need either fixing, repairing, or just get a credit from the seller back to do your repairs on your own after you own the property. And of course, when I was looking at this, I was looking to house hack. So I was at least looking for a 2 to 4 unit building. And the reason 2 to 4 is because around my parts, house hacking a single family can work, but not as well as if you were to do a duplex. And then you can't go above a 4 unit without going into commercial financing. So if you stick between the 2 to 4 units, you can get an FHA loan as your first time home buyer, and you'll be able to get in there with only 3.5% down, which is really nice. Or if it's not your first house and you want to do an owner occupy on a 2 to 4 unit, there are some loan programs that will be even a 5% down, low down payment, which is really nice. So you can sneak into a rental property for cheap money like I did in this. So how did I come across this property? So I simply found this property on the MLS. But as this was my first time buying a house, and of course being my first rental property, I almost got the fear of analysis paralysis, which will just kind of put you in a state where you don't want to make a move, even if you know you're not running your numbers right. Everything looks correct and you don't really think you're missing anything. But since it's your first time, you still get scared and you just kind of freeze up, which is where I was almost at. But I was literally running just about every house that was hitting the market for a multifamily in my area, I was running the numbers, checking out everything. So I was becoming really good at being able to tell when a property would cash flow, how it would cash flow, how it would perform, all that good stuff. So I was getting to know my stuff, but I was still getting just kind of scared to do it because, I mean, heck, you're buying your first house, you're buying a rental property. For me, I'm becoming a landlord. But the biggest thing to help me get over that analysis paralysis and really get the courage to just make the move and sign the paperwork and own a house was really educating yourself. And luckily for me, I did have someone that I knew that invests in real estate. So I was able to go to him with questions when something would come up with like a house inspection dispute that we'd have. I could ask him about that, or just kind of even before that, just running the numbers and like, what should I estimate for this? How much should I look for insurance? All that stuff. He was really helpful with that. And then, of course, educating yourself with books, podcasts, YouTube, great sources. Of course, you're looking at this on YouTube, but books are huge, huge. They're so laid out, and a lot of them, like I got some off of Bigger Pockets. They do great with first time real estate investors. Their podcasts, Bigger Pockets podcast, amazing resource for me. At that time, I was a driver. So whenever I was doing my deliveries, I just had Bigger Pockets podcast on probably 4 to 6 hours a day, just listening and learning and seeing what I should really be paying attention to, and a lot of stuff that first time investors overlook. That, guess what? I can learn from their mistakes. I can take in that, oh, they forgot to run this when they did theirs. So I'll have to make sure to do that. But it's also a thing where it's like, look, even if you are on that edge of analysis paralysis, you don't want to make the pull of the trigger to really get it. Chances are when you're running your numbers, you're going to be looking at everything you need to look at. Are you going to be missing some stuff? Probably. It's the first time becoming a real estate investor. You're not going to know everything to know. Now, will that something that you miss break the deal? If you're really running your numbers good, no, probably not. Unless it's something major, but that's why you have a house inspection, because I couldn't just go into a house and be like, oh, well, that looks like it needs to be repaired. Especially at that time. That was before I was an agent. I didn't know what I was looking at. So that's where you rely on people that are actual professionals in that trade. But even with this property, I always thought it was too small. That was a big thing why I didn't want to buy it. I thought that the units are about 900 square feet for a two bedroom. For some reason, I thought it was too small. A big thing for this was because when I went and toured the property, both of the units were taken up by tenants. So it's not that they were necessarily messy tenants, because they weren't, but tenants have stuff. They have the layout as they want the layout. So sometimes it's kind of hard because some people just don't really know how to lay out their house for it to feel flowy. So sometimes you'll like walk through looking at these places and it's like, well, this looks like it wouldn't work at all. But it could just because of the way that the tenant has their furniture laid out. Or sometimes the tenant just has a lot of crap that you have to overlook to see what the actual potential of the property is. What negotiations did I make on this property? So I did do some negotiating with the sellers. My realtor at the time was really good with it. This was actually before I was an agent. So I first started buying rentals and then I got my license, which is kind of a backwards way of a lot of people doing it. Usually they get their license, sell, and realize, well, maybe I should start investing in this stuff. Me, I was backwards with that. But anyways, it was up for 172,000, and that's what I got it under contract for, because being such a young age, and my biggest goal with this was to keep my cash out of pocket as low as possible. So instead of negotiating on the actual purchase price, what I did was ask for seller concessions that would get applied towards my closing costs and my down payment. So that would help offset my out of pocket expense. So what I ended up doing was offering 172,000, which is what they were up for, with $9,000 back at closing, which allowed me to get into this with only $5,000. Now, this did actually end up being a problem because what I didn't know, because this was my first time buying a home, so I didn't really know all the rules and regulations behind stuff, but FHA only allows 6% cash back at closing. So on 172,000, it's roughly $7,500. But I had the contract signed saying that the seller would give me 9,000. And once the statement came out the day before closing, which is where you'll see like a breakdown of what the seller's getting and what you're owing, all that, I noticed that my concessions from the seller were only adding up to a little bit over 7,500. And I brought this up to my agent because I was like, hey, we got 9,000 on the contract. That's what I'm supposed to be getting back for cash at close. And then this whole thing blew up where it's like, well, yes, that is true, but the loan only allows for 6%, so there's not really anything we can do. But what was super nice is the sellers stuck with their word because they signed the contract saying they would give us 9,000. So after everything closed and we had all the papers signed and I owned the house, they actually wrote a personal check from them to me for $1,500 to make up for that difference. And that is basically how I only had to bring, technically it was $5,020 to closing. But I mean, if you look at it with the $1,500 check, it was more like $3,500, a little under $3,500 to get into my first rental, which is absolutely insane to look back at. To get under $4,000 for a rental is crazy. So that's why you always want to talk with your agent and learn and do that stuff so you can actually see what's out there and available for you to get, because it might be something you have to work towards, but it's definitely something that's achievable. How were the tenants that I inherited? So this was kind of a unique situation because I inherited both tenants, but I was buying this as an owner occupied. So with an FHA loan, you have to be moved into that property within 60 days because it is going to be your primary residence. So I had to inherit both tenants because the unit that I was going to move into still had about a month left on their lease. So I had to take in both the tenants. And a lot of times when I was listening to Bigger Pockets, reading all the books, they say do not inherit tenants because those tenants didn't go through your specific screening process. So you don't really know much about the tenants because sometimes when you buy these places, all you get is what their lease is. And you, like, I didn't even know the occupation of the people upstairs. I didn't know what they did. I didn't know anything about them other than their names and that I had their security deposit. That was about it. But it went really smooth, and the tenants moved out on their date that they had to move out. And the downstairs tenant was also great. She stayed throughout the rest of her lease. She didn't renew because of a job relocation. Lessons I've learned from this property, and how is the property doing now? So the biggest lessons I've learned from this property are simply just learning how to be a landlord and how to actually screen the tenants correctly, how to take care of the rental, how to do maintenance and set up contractors if you need work. All that stuff is really just, once you dive into this, you kind of need to learn all that, and you can't really learn it unless you dive into it. So that's where a lot of people overthink that they want to have everything perfectly lined up before they make the leap into investing in rentals. Which I get, you want to be prepared, but you can also only be so prepared before you actually have to just go do it, experience it, and guess what? Experience is the best teacher. So you're going to learn the lessons when you actually are doing it. And this property really has taught me how to screen tenants. Since I've bought the property, I've had 3 tenants down there, and all of them have been great. I've learned how to actually look through screening and be able to pick a good tenant. And even through the pandemic, all that, I never missed a month of rent. And also with placing tenants, sometimes it's better to wait. So it's happened actually twice when I was renting that place that I waited a couple weeks to a month for the right tenant because it worked with their situation and I was able to hold out for that little time. And is it losing money? Technically, yes. But it's also knowing that I'm going to get a good tenant in there, which I'd rather have a high quality, good tenant that sounds like they're going to actually stay longer than a few months to a year, which is the goal here because you kind of want to reduce your turnover just because usually with turnover equals repairs and lost money because of vacancy. Now for the fun part of the numbers breakdown. So I'm not going to jump into super specifics, but I am going to say what it was getting when I bought the property, what the rents are now, and kind of what my cash flow is looking like now. So when I first offered and bought this property, the rents were $1,100 for the upstairs unit and $1,200 for the downstairs unit. Everything included. I mean everything, heat and all that. Even though the heats are separate and you can split them very easily, everything was included. So of course, the upstairs tenants moved out. That's where I lived. Downstairs was still paying 1,200. Once she didn't renew, I was okay with it because I knew I could raise the rents to what they were more market rent, which was about 1,400 at the time. So I went from 1,200 to 1,400 for a few years. Then those tenants moved out and I got another tenant. And now that tenant's at $1,500. I did make a mistake of including heat in that, but that was because heat back then wasn't super expensive. So I was fine with it because I lived in the property. So I could keep an eye on the oil because I didn't want it going dry. So that's was another thing of being a first time landlord. I didn't want the tenant letting it go dry and ruining my furnace. So I was like, well, I better just include it. So it kind of depends how it was. It worked for me. Now it kind of bit me in the butt, but it's a lesson learned. So at that time, 3 years ago, rents were the 1,100 and 1,200, and it looked like I would cash flow about $500 if I moved out. So that's about 250 a door, which was above my goal of what I wanted. But over the past 3 years, like I said, rents have went up. I also refinanced out of my FHA loan into a regular conventional loan because it was during the time when the interest rates were so low. I took advantage of that because I had equity in my house. Because luckily, I bought this back when properties were low. Did I know that when I bought? No. Did it work out well? Yes. I can't say, oh, I predicted that. No. When I bought it, I thought it was high. I was scared that it was too much money for what it was. Turned out to be a decent investment. I was able to refi, which lowered my payment actually because it lowered my interest rate and took off what they call private mortgage insurance, which is anything with a low down payment loan. You're going to have under 20% down payment, you're going to have private mortgage insurance. So back then, like I said, I was looking at about $500 cash flow. Now with all the stuff that's went on, the rent's going up, my mortgage getting refinanced, all that good stuff. I went from the 1,100 and 1,200 for rents to 1,700 and 1,500 in rents. So I went from looking like I was gonna cash flow about $500 a month, give or take, to now once when I moved out, which I am moved out now, I'm cash flowing about $1,500 a month, which is pretty insane to think about. Like, this was a really good deal. And again, I didn't think that when I first bought it. I thought it was too much. I didn't think it cash flowed enough. But I knew I had to make the jump. I knew I could afford it, in even if it didn't make super good sense because I was still living there as my primary residence. But luckily, it worked out great. And again, a lot of people are going to be like, well, you snuck in right at the right time. You bought perfectly at the right time. You bought when it was low. And again, yes, looking back, I bought when it was low. Did I think it was low when I bought? No, not at all. And guess what? I also just bought a rental a couple months ago. So it's like, as long as the numbers make sense, you kind of have to like stop listening to everyone around you saying how bad everything is. If the numbers make sense, the good thing about numbers is they're really hard to lie. So unless you're lying with the numbers you're putting in and not being realistic, that's on you. That's not the numbers. If you put in the numbers that make sense, numbers don't lie. But that basically sums up how I got into my first rental for $5,000 at 20 years old and basically was living for free with that purchase, which was amazing because a lot of people like, yes, you're doing this for financial purposes is the biggest reason. So you can set yourself up for the future and actually have something that can produce income for you and have stable income coming in with rentals. But the other thing a lot of people don't talk about with at least even just getting like a duplex, like I started with, the amount of stress that this took off, I basically was living for free. I didn't have to really worry about a housing cost. Like, yeah, I had my mortgage every month, but the unit below was basically covering all that. And there were some expenses that I had to pay throughout the year, but I mean, it was making it so I was paying a couple $100 in rent, if that. So, like, that allowed me to go from a full time job to a part-time position at the same place. I went down to part-time hours, became a real estate agent, worked as a real estate agent for about a couple of years, 2 years or so, as a part-time agent while still working a part-time job because I didn't need the full-time income, so I could take a little bit of a risk doing the part-time realtor. And then that also down the road, a couple months ago actually, is when I quit my W-2 job and became full-time realtor. And all this was because of getting this rental and getting rid of a big rent or house payment that I didn't necessarily have to come up with, even though I did own the building and I was growing wealth in the process, which is just crazy to think about. And that's why I don't think enough people know about house hacking and how it can be great to get into, but you still have to look at it like if you get even just a duplex, you're a landlord. So you have to be prepared for that and you have to educate yourself, know what you're talking about, do stuff correctly, and take pride in your property if you're going to do it. It's not cut out for everyone, but if it's something that interests you, definitely start learning about it and kind of dive deeper into that. But that basically wraps this video up. I hope this was of some value to you. And if it was, I would love a like on the video. And of course, subscribe for our weekly videos that I put out about real estate, New Hampshire real estate market, some property tours, all that good stuff. And like again, if you're looking to buy in New Hampshire or just have some questions about buying a house or buying a rental, right here is my contact info, and down below in the description, feel free to reach out anytime, and I appreciate it. Until next time.